of the Bible. We've done several books of the Bible here. We've kind of taken some breaks from that as well. But I wanted to turn into another book of the Bible. And it might be an unusual one for you. Maybe you've never read this book. This is Ecclesiastes. It's in the Old Testament. And it is an interesting book. It is a book that if you have ever read it, you probably have read it and been like, I don't know what to do with this. I was just talking with Gail about this. We were just kind of talking back and forth about Ecclesiastes in general. And I was saying, you know, Ecclesiastes is kind of the we need to talk of the Bible. If you've ever had that talk with your spouse or whatever, when your spouse says, we need to talk, you know that that's not good. And there's that sense of dread. And it's like, oh, geez, what's this going to be? But it is also something that usually needs to be talked about, even if we don't want to. And Ecclesiastes is kind of that. Ecclesiastes brings us to places in our minds and shows things to us that are uncomfortable, things that we don't want to talk about, things that we don't want to see. But we have to see, and we have to think about, and we have to center ourselves onto that. And so this was actually, believe it or not, the first book of the Bible I ever read, long before I was a Christian. And I read it in English class as a piece of literature because it has been appreciated outside of even Bible circles for its literary content and the style in which it's written. And even in a secular high school, in an English class in Massachusetts, it was something that I read even right there. And so it wasn't the first thing when I got saved. I didn't open up the Bible to Ecclesiastes, but ages before that, I read it in a high school class. And it is often seen as a very pessimistic book. It is seen as this book that's kind of sad and dour, and some people more in our modern times have looked at this and says, why is this even in the Bible? I mean, it just sounds so down. It says things like, all is vanity. And we say, well, what place does that have to do in the Bible? Well, we'll get into that, but this is part of wisdom literature. This right here, Ecclesiastes, along with Job and Proverbs and Psalms, was a division of the scriptures that they called the writings. It was wisdom literature, as we call it today. It was designed to make a person wise. And just like Job, it's one of its counterparts here, Job is a book that has to be understood in the fullness of its context. Because Job is long. It's 42 chapters. And it has entire chapters that are nothing but Job's friends who are berating him for not getting it. And what they say isn't necessarily true. So if you were to just take a quote from one of these friends, you're like, well, okay, but we have to put it in this context and we have to understand what it is. And so as this book is wisdom literature, it has been said that Job teaches us to suffer, the Psalms teach us to worship, Proverbs teaches us to behave, Song of Solomon teaches us to love, Ecclesiastes teaches us to live. Because that is what is the heart of Ecclesiastes. It is a book that gets to the heart of life itself. It asks the big questions, the real big questions that we ask today. It asks these great questions. What is the purpose of life? Why am I here? Is there more to life than what I am experiencing here? What is my purpose? How do I find fulfillment? How do I find peace and joy and contentment? Why do I do the things that I do, and is there more? These are the questions that Ecclesiastes looks right at and answers for us. Sometimes not answering them in ways that we want to, but always answering it with truth, with God's truth. Ecclesiastes shows us exactly what it looks like to be taken captive by philosophy and empty deceit. We read about that in Colossians 2, and according to human tradition and the elemental spirits of the world. It just shows us the hollowness and the emptiness of the worldly pursuits. And it is supremely practical because of this. And it is my hope that as we go through the Ecclesiastes that we'll see how practical this is, because it is right there in the everyday meaning and purposes of life. By tackling these big questions that we face every day. Ecclesiastes asks the biggest and hardest questions that people all around the world are asking today. It brings us to a place to help us worship God more fully and show us the true depths of God's wisdom and wonder. Warren Wiersbe, who is a pastor and theologian, he summed up the book like this. He said, when he was tasked with doing a series of commentaries on the Old Testament, he said, I could think of no better place to start than Ecclesiastes. And I could think of no better title than Be Satisfied, is what he titled it. Because that's what Ecclesiastes is about. Life is fulfilled with difficulties and perplexities, as King Solomon concluded. And there's much that nobody can understand, let alone control. From the human point of view, it's all vanity and folly. But life is God's gift to us, and he wants us to enjoy it and use it for his glory. So instead of complaining about what you don't have, start giving thanks for what you do have and be satisfied. That's what he had to say about this book of Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes is that type of book. It brings us to places that are hard, and we have to wrestle with it a little bit. And we're going to wrestle with that together here over the next few weeks, and we're going to go through what Ecclesiastes has to give us. And so, if you would join me in your Bibles or in the insert that you have there, and we're going to read verses 1 through 11. This is the introduction to the book. It comes with its own introduction. It comes with its own kind of prologue of sorts. And we're going to kind of walk through this and then look at what just this prologue has to say to us as it sets the tone for the entire book and what that means for us today. And so if you would join me in that, in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1, we read, "The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does a man gain by the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind. On its circuits the wind returns. All streams run into the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which is said, 'See, this is new'? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after." And so you can see why people think this is a little bit of a downer. It says some things there that are kind of like, okay, by introducing this very idea, vanity of vanities, and then ending with, there's not going to be anybody who remember anything. Well, we're going to walk through this here, and these verses, like I said, are kind of the prologue, and it captures the tone and the theme and the tempo of the whole book. He sets the stage here with this opening introduction and this opening kind of poem here. And Ecclesiastes does this. It kind of goes back and forth from poetry to more regular writing, what we call prose. And so we open on this verse 1, which gives us the background here. It gives us the introduction. He is told to us here in verse 1, he is, in the ESV, which is what's in your bulletin, maybe your Bible says something different, but he is the teacher or the preacher. In Hebrew, his name is Kohelet, which just means the one who gathers an assembly. So that's why he is usually called the teacher, the preacher, because the idea being that someone who gathers an assembly to teach them or to preach at them. The title of the book is Ecclesiastes. That's literally just a Greek translation of the same idea. Ecclesia, a church, is the ones who are called together, who are called out. And so the assembly, so Ecclesiastes would be someone who assembles people, who calls them out to hear something. And so we're told here that this Ecclesiastes here, this preacher, is a son of David, king of Jerusalem. There has been a lot of ink spilt in various books and stuff, entire books, but also almost every book on Ecclesiastes has some of them have 2 chapters on this whole question. Some of them have even more. Some of them, half the book is spent just on this one question: who is Kohelet? Who is the preacher? Who is this man? And tradition says that it's Solomon, because he identifies himself here as Solomon. He says, this is the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. Elsewhere, he says that he rules in Jerusalem. He rules over Israel in Jerusalem. There's only 2 kings who ruled in Israel, over all of Israel, in Jerusalem, and that was David and Solomon, because after Solomon's death, the kingdom is split. And so who would reign? Who else could it possibly be talking about? There's some people who say, well, there's a lot of things in this book that point to something else. This language is so sophisticated, it couldn't possibly be Solomon because it's just too sophisticated for the time. But really, that's just subjective, because Ecclesiastes in and of itself is such a unique piece of literature. It's such a unique book in how it phrases things that there's really nothing else to measure it against. It is unlike all of the rest of Scripture, sure, but it's also unlike almost everything else that was written in that time, so we don't know. So ultimately, all that to say, it's probably Solomon, but we don't know exactly. And honestly, it doesn't change the message of the book. This book speaks to eternal truths, like I was just saying, about what is life, what's the point, what's the purpose, all those things. It doesn't matter if I'm telling you that 2 + 2 = 4, it doesn't matter if that comes from me, or that comes from my son, or that comes from, some person wearing a tinfoil hat. It doesn't matter who it is, if the truth is the truth. And so we know that this is the inspired word of God. This has always been in the Bible. Even though other books of the Bible that we've looked at, Esther, for example, was really contested about what does this belong in the Bible. Ecclesiastes has never really been under that much of a question, because it is understood the truths that are in here are so important for us. And so verses 2 through 3, after telling us who this is, this introduction of who this is, this preacher, this Kohelet, this man here, and he is introducing the themes of the book here. As he introduces in verses 2 through 3, he opens with one of the resounding statements of this book. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And if you've listened to me for a while now, I've talked about how this kind of repetition of a word is the way of adding an exclamation point. We talked about Lord of Lords and King of Kings is kind of a way of saying the lordiest Lord, whoever lorded, and the kingliest king, whoever kinged. And this is this way here. By saying vanity of vanities, is saying the vanitiest thing that was ever vanity. This is the vanitiest thing. This is it. And he repeats it twice to even add even more exclamation points on it. So you can see this as all is vanity, all caps, with like 6 exclamation points after it. That's what he's saying. All is vanity. And just in case you didn't know that, it's the vanity of vanities. And he says it twice. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Well, when we hear this word vanity, we tend to think of that as a really negative statement. We think of things of, well, you're so vain. Right? We think of things like Vanity Fair. I like Pilgrim's Progress, and they go through Vanity Fair. Vanity Fair is not a good thing. It is a thing of vanity. And we think of this as a very negative and kind of pejorative word, like kind of a put down, right? Everything's vanity. You're putting everything down. And that's why we tend to think of this as a very negative book, because it opens with what could be perceived as a very negative statement. Vanity, everything's vanity. No other book in all of Scripture, in terms of its tone and theme, rests so much on one word than Ecclesiastes. One word. What are we talking about when we're saying that everything is vain? Well, the Hebrew word here, not to get all nerdy, I was a Hebrew study guy, and so not to get all language nerdy on you, but I'll tell you a little bit here. The word here is hevel. And so this is Hevel Hevelim, the vanity of vanities. But Hevel, there's entire books written on what this word means. What is Hevel? What is this? Well, its meaning is really a breath or a vapor. The idea is like on a day like, well, it's warming up today, so maybe more like yesterday or one of these cold days, when you step outside, or early in the morning in the wintertime, you step outside and you breathe and you can see your breath in the cold air. And it dissipates. And that's what this is about. This is breath, this vapor. It appears 38 times here in Ecclesiastes. It's this breath. And so it's not really a declaration that everything is meaningless, because we think about breath. Well, is breath meaningless? Stop breathing for a moment. Don't really, okay? Don't. If you were to hold your breath for a moment, think about how important breathing is. I know I used to go skin diving in the lakes there in Maine, and we'd dive down to the bottom of this big deep lake and to collect mussels off the bottom for a bait and for eating, but for bait for fishing. And we'd go out in the boat there, and we'd put on the fins there and just gulp in as much air as you possibly could and dive down, just jump in and dive to get as many mussels as you could while you were down there. And I can tell you that as you're coming up, you feel that pain in your chest of, oh my goodness, I need to breathe, and I need to breathe right now. And you can't. You have to wait a second, because if you do, you will die. And so this breath is what this is talking about, breath. But breath is not meaningless. Breath is actually quite important. It takes about 3 minutes to die without oxygen. If you stop breathing, you will, without some serious intervention, you will be dead within minutes. And so this declaration that everything is hevel, everything is breath, is not so much a condemnation of everything or a judgment in the negative sense. It is, in the tradition of wisdom, a statement of truth. It is still saying something rather important here, and it is still saying something that you could take in a not very positive way, but it is more of a neutral statement. It is a neutral statement. It's saying, listen, everything is just breath. Everything is vapor. It is the breathiest breath that there was ever breath. It is such a vapor. It is just this thing. If I was to blow out this candle, there would be a little puff of smoke that would come up, and it would be gone. And that's what everything is. Everything is just this puff of smoke. It is the breath on a cold winter's morning. It is not graspable. It is not tangible. It doesn't have solidity. It doesn't have something that I can grab onto. Everything is it's just this vapor. It's just, you can't grasp it. And it gets to what a lot of Ecclesiastes is getting at here, that we can't understand things, that there's so much in this life that is beyond our understanding that you can't grasp at it. Well, you can't grasp at it because it's breath. We want to understand. We want to have answers to all these questions. We want to know, why am I here and what am I doing? And Ecclesiastes says, all that is breath. You can't understand it, but that's okay. That's okay. Because it's all just breath. It's all just breath. And so the problem that Solomon had there is that no matter where he looked for that, as he goes through all this, he finds that it's all just breath. He can't find the substance. He can't find this thing here. As he explores all this, he takes us through this journey over the whole of this book, taking on this journey looking for that substance, looking for the thing that has solidity, the thing that can be grasped, something that is not just breath and vapor. And he takes us through this, and he says that it's all vanity. Everything I found was just empty. Everything was just empty, and it was vapor. And yet, Kohelet's verdict against this reflects nothing on the works of God, which at their original formation, the Maker, our good God, said was very good. Rather, the preacher here is speaking of life as we know it today, life under the curse of sin. Life as in Romans 8:18 through 22, we're told there by Paul that, for I consider the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing to the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation itself was subjected to futility. There's that idea, this futility. It was subjected to this emptiness, to this vanity, to this thing. But it wasn't done this, as Paul continues here in Romans, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself would be set free from its bondage of corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. And he goes on to tell us here that the whole creation has been groaning together with the pains of childbirth until now, waiting for this Redeemer to come. And Ecclesiastes talks about that world right there that's waiting for the redemption, that's waiting for this. That yes, everything is empty, but it's not empty because that's just how it is. It's empty for a reason, that there's a purpose behind that there's something else there. Psalm 144:4 says that man is like a breath and his days are like a passing shadow. Okay, that happened. It's just a breath and a vapor. I have no idea why that happened. I can't grasp at it. It just happens sometimes. Isaiah 46-8, one of my favorite passages there, says, all flesh is grass, and its beauty is like the flower of the field. The grass withers and the flower fades when the breath of the Lord blows on it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our Lord stands forever. And so this is this contrast there. There's this idea here buried into this, saying, yes, everything is transitory. Yes, everything is this breath. Yes, everything is fleeting and it can't be grasped. But there's something else in that as well. John Wesley once preached through Ecclesiastes, and he commented on it and said, never before had I so clear a sight of either life's meaning or its beauties. Neither did I imagine that the several parts of it, Ecclesiastes, were so exquisite a manner connected together and tending to prove the grand truth that there is no happiness apart from God. Because that's really what he's getting at here by declaring this. All is vanity. This is all empty. It's all emptiness. And so he gets to this idea here about all is emptiness, and then he goes on to kind of prove his point as he asks this question. He has this declaration of a thesis. His thesis is all is vanity, all is emptiness, all is breath. And then he asks the question, well, I want to take you, this is a preacher, so I'm going to be like a preacher here. I want to take you on a journey. I ask you a question. And in verse 3, he asks a question. All is breath, right? Okay. What does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? So he asks a question. And the rest of Ecclesiastes is kind of pulling that out. And this is a very big question to simply say, what is the point? Is there a point? What point is there in a person's life? He asks this question by saying, what does a man gain? What is there left over? This word gain is this leftovers. Is there anything left over after a man has toiled in the toil in which he toils? Toiling is another big word in this. And the work that he has worked in this, is there anything left? If you live your life, you work, you do your job, and all of that, is there anything left over? Is there anything that is extra on top of that? Is that it? Or is there more? Is there some greater thing? Is there some purpose that exists out there? And he asks this question here in this thing here. Why? Why and what? Why am I here? What is my purpose? And he talks about this toil and this trouble. And again, Ecclesiastes doesn't exist in a vacuum. It might seem down and dour, but it is part of the entirety of the scriptures here. And we see these ideas expressed elsewhere. In Psalm 90, verse 10, we're told that the years of our life are 70, or by the reason of strength, 80. This is by saying, you might live 70 years, you might live 80 years. Yet their span is but toil and trouble. They're soon gone, and we fly away. So that, you live this life, and it's all just toil and trouble, and you go away. Psalm 127, verse 1 says that, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. So we have the same idea of vanity and labor, that you are laboring on something that's empty. Unless the Lord is there, unless you are working with the Lord, unless the Lord is in that it is all just vain. It is all emptiness. It is all breath. Unless the Lord is in that. And so he asks this question here, and he introduces this, what is the point of all of these things? And he uses another one of these phrases that occurs over and over in this book, under the sun. Because ultimately, under the sun is where the rest of this book takes place. Under the sun. By looking at under the sun, this world in which we live, this life right now where you are living, right here, is under the sun. The world that I can see and touch and feel and hear. This world right here, this under the sun, this purely material world that I see every day when I wake up. The material world that I feel when I have a crick in my back, those types of things. This is the world he's saying, this physical world right here under the sun. Is there purpose here? Is there something more here? Well, he makes the statement, all is vapor, all is breath. He asks the question, what's the point? Is there a point? And then he sets the tone here for the rest of the book by kind of bringing us through what under the sun looks like. What is under the sun? What is life under the sun? And he does that here through verse 4. He tells us that generations go and generations come, and that the earth remains forever. The things come, things go, that's that. But elsewhere in Ecclesiastes, in chapter 3:14, he says, I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. And so he says here that the earth remains forever, but we're told in Ecclesiastes 3 that we'll get to here that the works of God stand forever as well. And all that stands in contrast to generations come and generations go. People come, people go, right? Generations come, generations go. This has been the way of the earth for all time. Generations have come, generations have gone. Generations have come, generations have gone. This is just the way it goes. I've been in Kansas City, there's a World War I memorial. All right, no one even hardly talks about World War I anymore. No one even, there's no one alive who was there. It has come, it has gone. Entire generation has come and gone. My children will not know any World War II vets, most likely, because most of them have gone. And the few that remain are not people that they're going to meet. And if they were even to meet them now, they're so young they wouldn't remember it when they grow up. So we go into these things. Generations come, generations go. Things move on. Things go and they come and they go and they come and they go and they come and they go. And we have this cycle here, and he's going to get to that in a little bit here, but we don't even have this context too much. So generations come and generations go. I remember once, and Benjamin's going to be embarrassed here, when he was younger, and he said, when were you born? And I told him I was born in the 80s, and in 1981. He says, oh, so were you there for the Civil War? And I was like, well, no, buddy. That was a lot longer ago. And so, but just to show you, yes, in the eyes of a child, but we don't have any grasp on things. Generations come and generations go, and that was, that was a long time ago. Was that 1 generation ago, 2 generations ago, 5 generations ago? It all just it's just all this cycle of coming and going, generations coming and generations go. All the while, we're told here that the earth remains forever. And he highlights that by telling us here in verse 5, by telling us the sun goes up, the sun goes down, and over again it is up and down. The sun goes, we have sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset, over and over again. And yes, sometimes you have a hot day, sometimes you have a cold day, but at the end of it all, the sun goes up, the sun goes down. It completes this over and over again. And we're told here about the wind. The wind blows in the direction that it goes. And we think about, as he's talking about everything is empty or this breath, we know that things like sun and wind, they are fleeting and they continue to go and stuff, but they're not meaningless. If you have a heat wave, you have a drought, that affects life. We know the power of wind, and he's not saying that wind is nothing, but he's saying that it just continues to go. The wind blows, and the wind blows around and around and around it goes. It just goes. The wind goes. It is not without power, though. I remember just a few months ago, I never say that word right, in Iowa, there was that derecho thing. She's trying to mouth it. I don't know. That big windstorm there, and it blew over silos and wrecked people's crops. Entire fields just blown over, just corn, and silos just squashed like there was nothing. And so wind has this power, but at the end of it all, wind blows, and it comes back again. There's no place where wind stops. It doesn't stop. You don't go over here where the wind stops. You go over here, and wind just stops there. All right, so someone's got to go and connect that end back to the other ventilator system so that it comes back again. And wind just goes around and around and around. Wind blows. And he goes on to tell us about, in verse 7, the rivers are another thing. Think about this Missouri River that's right out here. Watch how much water is moving there. Stay on the banks of that, and just watch how much water is going. There's so much water, and the sheer volume is mind-boggling. I looked it up at the mouth of the Missouri River, where it meets the Mississippi, it is 35,000 cubic feet per second of water right there, just before it enters into the the Mississippi. It is 35,000 cubic feet per second. So a cubic foot, this big, by this big, by this big, 35,000 of those every second flowing by. This is, we can't even, this room would be filled with water in a second. It'd just be, it'd be it. This is such a huge volume of water. And just with that's just one river on one continent. Yet the seas do not stop receiving water. Imagine if the river just stopped. The sea said, I've had enough. I'm good. The river just stopped. Well, that would certainly change everything. But this water cycle is such a fundamental part of life. It's one of the first things the kids learn in school about science, that yes, the water flows down these rivers. Yes, these massive volumes of water. But the sea is never full, as he tells us here. Right? The sea is not full to the place where the streams flow. There they flow again. We have the water cycle. The water flows out to the ocean. It's evaporated. It becomes the clouds. And then it rains again. And the whole thing goes over and over again. This is the cycles of the earth. The sun goes up, the sun goes down, the wind blows around, the rain, even the water itself, the very substance of life, just kind of flows and does this thing, and the earth remains. All these things come and go. And verse 8 continues that survey of life under the sun by bringing us again to the human experience, by telling us here in verse 8 that all things are full of weariness, a man cannot utter it, which is one translation says, all life is far more boring than words could ever say. And that's really what he's getting at here, that life is full of weariness. It's not so much that it's tiring, it's just boring. Because this never-ending cycle, generations come, generations go, the sun, the wind, the rain, the water, all this stuff just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And it's just, as it says here, man cannot utter it. You can't, it just goes on and it goes on. Kind of like the sermon, right? It just goes on and goes on and goes on. But man can't even utter it. So what does this do? This unending monotony of life. What is this here? And we're told here that it goes on to our life by saying that our eyes don't grow weary of seeing and our ears weary of hearing. Yes, our eyes might grow dim as we get old, but there's never a moment when you open your eyes, and barring illness or disease, that you open your eyes or you're just walking out there and your eyes said, you know what, I've had enough of receiving light today. I'm just going to shut off now. Or your ears just say, you know what, I'm full. I've been filled with the hearing and now I am full. Like I've received enough sound and it's full. Kind of like you go to the buffet and you've had enough and you can't eat another bite. Your eyeballs and your ears never say, I've had enough. That's just not how it works. They don't ever say, I'm busting at the seams, my eardrums, no, I've had enough, and you just become deaf for the rest of the day because you had your fill. That's not how it works. Everything just goes on and on and on and on. It's this repetitive thing here. And we might say, okay, well, some things happen that is new, right? Well, we're told here in verse 9 that what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. In case you didn't get it the first time, he says it twice. That everything that has been, was, and what was, will be again. And that we have this often repeated line here that we hear a lot of times, that there's nothing new under the sun. We hear that, I say that often, and I hear it said often, there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new under the sun. And we might be pushed to say, well, hold on a second. We might want to say, that doesn't sound right. All right, I know that there's new stuff. Well, verse 10, to almost prove the point that there's nothing new, the author here, Kohelet here, he says, oh, you might think that there's something new, but verse 10 says, is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already. Just in case you think maybe you've seen something new, trust me, it has already been. Now, you might be sitting there and saying, but, what of... Solomon knew nothing of electric lighting and cars and phones and computers and internet and all those things. Certainly those are new, right? These are things that have never been before, correct? Well, are they new? I mean, transportation is transportation. Whether it's a car or a horse, or you walk, you're still going in a place, and there's nothing really new there. You might get there faster, but transportation is transportation. Phones and things like that. Communication is communication. Whether it's me writing a letter and handing it to you and some guy walking it over to the next town, or me writing a letter and sending it into the mail, or however this happens, communication is communication. Nothing is fundamentally different in that. Information is information. We might say, the internet has changed everything. Well, ages and ages and ages ago, there was the great library in Alexandria. It was considered the biggest and most important place in one of the ancient world's big wonders. They had this library in Alexandria, and it burned to the ground. And with that, so much information from the past just burned down. But there was information then, and there's information now. Now, granted, I have here in my pocket a device that lets me access boundless information. More information that was in that Library of Alexandria, but it's still information, isn't it? It doesn't change the nature of it. Whether I have to go look it up in a book or go down to a library and pull out a scroll off a shelf, as they did in the ancient days, it doesn't change the fundamental realities of things. Things have gotten faster, but that doesn't change the flow and the monotony itself. Life still continues. You might be able to now, with technology, see more and know more than your ancestors did, but you still wake up in the morning. You still sit down and have breakfast, or maybe you have breakfast on the go. You still go to work. You still do your job. Life continues in this cycle. As one pastor put it, sure, we put a man on the moon, but there's nothing to do there except for stare back at the earth. I mean, so even in doing something like that, oh, it's new, we did something new. Well, what did they do when it got there? Hey, look, there's the earth. I mean, I can look at the earth right here. We're not doing anything fundamentally different. Verse 11 reminds us of something so important here that we forget as well. So we might think, these last things all tie together here, so we might think, this thing is new. Well, why do you think that thing is new? Well, because we don't remember things. We don't remember the former things. I just was talking about this cycle of generations come and generations go, and we had the World War I memorial, and we've got things like World War II, and we have all these big things that happen there. Generations come, generations go, but we forget. We forget. I think that what is happening today is new because I forgot what happened last week. And we see that all the time in the news cycles, right? We see even with the stuff happening in our news today. We see things happening in our news. Just this week, big stuff happened in the news. And we say, oh my goodness, this has never happened before. Except for all the times that it happened before. Because it has happened before. If it didn't happen here, then it happened elsewhere. I saw one of those memes there, one of those little jokes there, and they got some, watching these people, the things that happened in the Capitol building there, and it's, someone from South America said, I've seen this before. I said, it's not new. This has happened before. Just because we haven't seen it, we tend to think, this has never happened before. But it has happened before. And it's not new to us. I mean, the Israelites forgot God. In Joshua 24, 16 through 17, Joshua on his deathbed talking to the people, and the people tell him, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord and serve other gods, for it is the Lord, our God, who brought us and our fathers up from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who did these great signs in our sight and preserved us all the way that we went. And Joshua says to them, you're witnesses against them, in verses 22 and following. You are your own witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord to serve him. And they even say, we are witnesses. And he says, fine, then put away the foreign gods from among you and incline your heart to the Lord. And the people even said to Joshua right then, the Lord our God we will serve, and his voice we will obey. We're told of the same similar scene in Judges, as we have a recap in Judges 1 and 2, that Joshua then dismissed the people. The people of Israel each went to their inheritance and the possession of their land in Judges chapter 2. And we're told in verse 8 there that Joshua, the son of Nun, servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. And just 2 verses later, after it tells about the disposition of his body and how he was buried in such and such a place and all this stuff, literally he is buried, and we're told in Judges 2, verse 11, the same people who Joshua is on his deathbed, and he is saying, choose this day who you will serve, and the people saying, we will choose the Lord, we will serve him. And we're told in Judges 2:11, after he's buried, and the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord their God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and they went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples around them, that they abandoned the Lord and served Baal and Ashtaroth. It's not new. Again, nothing is new. We think that we forget things, and and we like to think that, well, if I was there, I wouldn't have forgotten. I've seen people say things, people who I've known, and I know a year ago they said otherwise, and now they say this. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Just a year ago you said this. Now I try not to call them out on that because, no one wants to be that guy. But this is part of our nature. We forget things. And I'm a relatively young man. I know that among people in this room, that there are exactly 5 people in this room that are younger than me, and they are my children. Well, 6 people, because technically my wife is younger than me by 4 whole days. And so I stand here as a relatively young man saying to you that I've seen styles go, styles come back again. I have seen ideas come and go again. I have seen people see things that have happened and say, could you believe that this happened? And I was like, well, yeah, because the same thing happened 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Our memories are faulty, and that's part of the problem of humanity that Kohelet here, this preacher, wants us to see. As he announces that all is emptiness and all is this breath and all is this vapor, he's saying, because everything on earth, everything that we experience in this life, everything that is under the sun just continues. There is nothing new, literally, under the sun. This under the sun world, this physical world that we touch, this physical world that we see with our eyes and hear with our ears, this physical world, this under the sun world where I live my life, this world is the same now as it was then and will be the same after me. And that's the setting for what he's trying to say here by saying to us, everything is this emptiness. And everything is just breath. And maybe, this makes us feel a little sad, but it's also a wonderful announcement to us that this life is not where things are found. So if you are looking to this life for your purpose, if you are looking at this life for meaning, if you are trying to find meaning in your work, well, he just says here, what gain does a man have by all the toil that he toils under the sun? It's all emptiness. If you're trying to find your meaning, your identity, your purpose, your life in anything that is under this sun, you have missed the point. Because everything that is under the sun, everything that is here is breath. It is that vapor. It is that wisp of smoke. And that is all that it is. Everything here is exactly that. We chase after meaning. As he will talk about here in Ecclesiastes here, we chase after wind. We chase after wind. We try to grasp something that cannot be grasped because it was never meant to be found here. And that's the message of Ecclesiastes as we get into the opening part of this. That's the message here. That's what I want the takeaway from today to be, that in God's good creation, there is nothing because of sin. That this is what it is. There is nothing here under the sun. There's nothing here. But again, Ecclesiastes doesn't exist in a vacuum, but it's part of God's truth. Augustine wrote that he who has God has everything. He who does not have God has nothing. And also that he who has God and everything has no more than he who has God alone. So if you have God, you have everything. And if you have everything except for God, you've got nothing. And that's what the preacher here in Ecclesiastes is saying. Everything here is nothing. It just goes in these cycles, and this is never-ending stuff, and it just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes and goes, and it's never-ending, and it never changes, and it's all the same. It's all just this breath. It's all fleeting. And we look to our lives or our houses or our monies or our careers or our everything, and we look to those, and we say, what is the point? Is there a point? And the message of Ecclesiastes is that yes, there is a point. A big, giant, yes, there is a point, because that point is God. It is in him that everything finds its purpose. It is in him that lasting hope and substance is found. It is in him that we have something that we can grab. It is him that we have this solid ground, because he is our solid ground. He is the rock. He is our firm foundation. He is our strong tower. He is our refuge. It is in him that we find the refuge from the chasing of the wind. It is in him that we find the refuge from the grasping at the nothing of breath that is everything else. This is the meaning. This is the search for significance, and it ends right there at God. Everything does matter because God. That's the answer of Ecclesiastes. Everything is meaningless? Sure. No. Everything matters because God. Without God, nothing matters. With God, everything matters. And what really matters is whether you know that God personally. Because this God has entered into the vanity, into the toilsome creation, into the place of breath and monotony and the never-ending cycle of the days. He entered into that to save those who were in their foolishness, who saved those who in their foolishness sought meaning in breath and vapor, to show us that real life was not found in breath and vapor. So I hope that as we look at Ecclesiastes here, we're going to go through some places. Ecclesiastes takes us down to this dark, mysterious valley, and it's going to take a hard, honest look at life, the vapor of life. It's going to take us to places where we look at all the dreams that disappoint, and it's going to take us through to see Jesus on the other side. The beauty and significance and lasting gain of knowing him. and living life in joyful and reverent submission to him. Because in this world, our only hope for lasting gain in a fleeting world is God himself.